really super pleased to have the folks from Vancouver here. And this is the Los Angeles Poverty Department, our headquarters known as the Skid Row History Museum and Archive. We have a big exhibition here around what's going on with the SRO hotels in Los Angeles, in downtown Los Angeles, and it's called Hotels in Crisis Again. And so, you know, we had a conversation, and Rostin Wu here is going to, the artist involved in this exhibition, is going to tell you about it in just a minute. We had a series of conversations connected to the show, and one of them was like how to buy a hotel. And Wendy wrote back, said, "We just bought a hotel." So from previous experience, we know that the downtown east side is really the brother and sister space of Skid Row, LA, because of its history of activism that's kept the community alive and going forward. So we're thrilled to have Wendy, Richard Schwab, and Andy Bond here with us tonight. I want to say usually the LA Tenants Union meets here on Wednesday night, and some of the members are here. Chris usually runs those meetings, and some other tenants folks here. And if you have anything you want to address with Chris, well, you know where to find him. And so now we owe this all to this guy in the middle here, Terry Hunter, who years ago got in touch with LAPD and subsequently introduced us to Wendy, brought us up to a tenants union annual convening up there. And today I asked him, because I asked him to write a little bio about Wendy, which I'm very pleased to read now, which is what? Wendy Pedersen has spent over 3 decades fighting for the downtown east side, the heart and soul of Vancouver. She is a powerhouse, Canadian grassroots organizer, and true champion for housing justice in the downtown east side. Early on, she co-founded the Potluck Cafe Society to bring healthy food and jobs to the neighborhood. Later, mentored by the legendary Gene Swanson, she took on tenant organizing with incredible passion. Together, they rallied the community to push political leaders for strict vacancy controls and to take over derelict hotels for the public good. In 2015, Wendy worked with SRO tenants to launch the Downtown Eastside SRO Collaborative, an amazing community-led initiative that stops evictions and helps SRO tenants collectively manage and even own their housing. So here's Wendy and Richard and Andy. And maybe, let's see, Rostin's going to do a little walk through the exhibition. But first, Wendy, maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about Richard and Andy.
Great. Well, Richard is the president of the SRO Collaborative Board and lives at the Arlington Hotel, which is one of our precious buildings that might be going into receivership soon, that we're going to try to we have to buy because we've been building an amazing community there. And Andy is my partner in crime. Basically, we started a community land trust, and Andy's the executive director. But John, should I give people a little bit of background about the downtown east side and just some little context?
Sure, absolutely.
And I want to kind of tee up Richard and then tee up Andy. And if we go on too long, let us know. But it's pretty short. I think what I have to say is pretty short. So yeah, so pleased to come. I'm going on a health leave soon, so I wanted to do something fun before I left. So when I saw that you guys were having your thing, I was like, okay, I want to do this. So there's 20,000 people living here in the downtown east side, including Terry and his family, Andy and Richard and me and my family. And we're known as the poorest postal code in Canada, just like, I guess, our equivalent. We are a sister city to Skid Row in Los Angeles, a sister neighborhood. So out of those 20,000, if you can imagine, not quite half, but almost half live in SROs in the neighborhood. And half of those SROs, this is really rough, but half of those SROs are owned by government. and half of the other half are privately owned. And I could tell you as a whole night of stories of how we got government to buy all those hotels. And Andy used to operate them. So in 2015, as Terry said, we knew we needed to do something about the privately owned hotels because we were losing them. We had been losing them for 15 years. We were documenting the losses with research. We were rallying at the last minute when the evictions or renovictions were happening. We were getting media. We were starting to convince governments that they had a problem, but they weren't really doing anything, and we didn't know what we were doing. Like we couldn't, there was a Chicano friend of mine who worked for a nonprofit housing company in Vancouver who told me, he was from San Francisco, and he said, "You guys are the worst organizers I've ever seen in my life." I was like, what? And because I'm kind of the weird person in the neighborhood that am curious, I don't get pissed off when somebody tells you that. I pursued him. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you need a collaborative. I'm like, what's a collaborative? And he's like, ugh. So anyhow, I looked online and I was like looking at posters in San Francisco because they have an SRO collaborative. I'm like, what is this place? So I ended up going and visiting and learning more. And then I started in 2015. This leads up to how you buy a hotel. Basically in 2015, we put an imaginary circle fence around all the privately owned buildings. They actually aren't in a circle, but we're like, okay, here's our jurisdiction. There's these 100 buildings, and we started organizing. And the organizing style that we did at the early days was not the right organizing style. So basically we were doing habitability complaints, legal complaints around habitability with the landlords, and joining up everybody in the building around the same complaints. And it was such a powerful tool that we caused owners to want to leave and sell their buildings. And some of the buildings we shut down by accident because the problems were so bad. The city said, okay, you really want us to look in here? Okay, you really want us to come and do this thing? And there were full-scale building closures, which, had some positives and negatives out of it. But in terms of causing the sales with our legal strategy and our community organizing strategy, governments, we begged them to intervene because we didn't want to get a gentrifying landlord, or we didn't want to get another bad landlord to buy the places. And government just didn't want to buy these hotels. They're incredibly risk averse. They already own half of the stock and they consider them a huge headache. There's been a ton of bad media about SROs and nonprofit management that's made them allergic to them. So, we repositioned the ownership, but governments would not step in. So at some point, I realized we got to change our strategy here. And so the collaborative became more about setting up teams of tenants in the hotels. We kind of need government to come on and buy these hotels, and they're not doing it yet. Andy will tell you a bit more about that. But in order to convince them, we kind of have to have a model that they can get behind and know that they're not just going into a building that's going to require a ton of operating costs for a ton of people that need a ton of support. So we started creating what we call tenant-based initiatives. And the tenant-based initiatives are basically, we find talented tenants. I call them super connectors. There's super connectors in every building. I would say 10% are so obviously super connectors, it's not hard to find them. Who's got their door propped open? Who knows everybody in their building? Who has a sparkle in their eyes when you mention community? Who's already looking after other people a little bit in their building? So we look for those folks and we give them a role. And governments are like, that's a great idea. You're helping the landlords. We're like, yeah, sort of. The landlords don't know we're in here doing this, but we're definitely helping prevent evictions and building a community and doing some very practical projects. So Richard was a super connector, and Richard didn't know anybody in his hotel for like 15 years. He knew some, but now he knows everybody in his hotel.
That
So
sounds like a segue to me.
yeah, Richard needs to tell you about what his role is in the hotel.
Okay, I'm an outreach organizer at the Arlington Hotel, and I've lived there for 22 years now. This all kind of happened in about 2019. Our building was up for sale, and a lot of people were worried about being rent-evicted or just kicked out or, wind up being homeless. So I don't know, a friend who knew someone at the SROC said, "Hey, you should go talk to them and find out, what we can do about this kind of stuff." And to make sure, people, I mean, a couple people did move out because they were just freaked out for some strange reason. Let's see.
And
Yeah.
how did you get going on the role, and what is the role?
Well, I wound up actually meeting almost all the people in the building, and I would start doing surveys and stuff. And then COVID hit.
Yeah, yes.
So that kind of sidelined some stuff, but the building got sold. We got a new owner. As Wendy said, we didn't tell the landlord what we were doing initially in the building, which was organizing. And let's see, 5 months into the new owners, I think it was July. The phone was cut off. So the phone was cut off, and the phone had been the phone number since like the 1970s. This building has been here since 1912. So we were like, this is part of our contract we signed to live in the place. So Wendy and a few other people at the SROC mentioned that maybe we should do a what's it called?
A petition.
A petition.
We wrote a really nice letter, like a butter would melt in your mouth letter, like to the landlord. We like you. We made the tenant say, we like you. You're a great landlord. You're the best landlord in the world.
However, so I went around with this petition and explained to everybody what was going on. And they were kind of like, oh, well, that sounds like a really good idea. So we had over 80% of the building sign the petition. And then I guess Wendy presented it to the landlord.
Yeah.
And back then we called it poking the bear, as in
we were scared.
We were scared. Poke the bear as the landlord. He might kick us all out for all we know. Or just shut or just disappear for all we know.
Yeah.
They do that every now and then. They're gone fishing is what we call it.
Yeah.
Gone fishing. So after we did that, in the next following months, the Cablevision dropped out as well. He forgot to pay the bill, as it were.
But what do you do to support the other tenants in the building? Because that's part of it. Because there's a little bit of advocacy element, but it's not the main element of our organizing anymore.
I provide resources for them. If you're being evicted or you've got problems with hoarding, I would send them to advocates or places that would help them, which there are a lot of resources here in downtown Vancouver or downtown East Side. So I would, send them if they needed a shower because the hot water heater broke down and it was down for a week one time or 2 weeks. So I would send them places that they could have free showers and, maybe get a cheap lunch as well. And I know all these places here, and I know even more of them now since I've been at the SROC for 6 years now, just over.
Yeah. And people trust Richard.
And people trust me and they know me. I've been a staple there for so long. But we've also got a couple other fellows in our building who one I didn't even know until 2020. I first met him and he's wound up being the caretaker of the place. So he has a position as well with the SROC, which is called Firebolts, which he's in charge of the fire safety and drills and keeping an eye on things, having the doors closed.
We get funding, you guys.
Yeah, that's how we get
evolution.
And by giving data too to those that help who do the funding,
Yeah, they love it.
be it the
We
civic
get quite a
government,
lot of money.
or the provincial government or the federal government.
Yeah.
They all kind of
And
give us a bit of a
we have
hand.
another guy that looks after the old guys in the hotel.
Yeah,
And who
another
helps
he
them clean out their rooms and do small repairs and do some cleaning
yeah,
jobs.
building repairs,
Yeah.
just soft repairs, nothing that requires like
So we're
a
paying
check.
for that,
Yeah.
and we get government grants and foundation money to do that. That is, to me, is step to buying your building. It's like putting together. I'm hearing a question maybe, but we're trying to get as many tenant to tenant, tenant to tenant, not staff to tenant, tenant to tenant. Our staff support Richard, but it's Richard that's doing the work tenant to tenant in his own building. And he's kind of supplementing the caretaker. It's making the caretaker's job easier, and it's making the building manager's job easier. And it's opening the door for us to get to know the landlords, and the landlords trusting us more. And the landlords are like, hey, can you guys know who will buy our building? So those conversations can happen. So that infiltration has been really, really critical for also governments who give us money to do these projects, to support the tenants to have these roles, start to get to know the story and care more about the privately owned hotels so that we can get more resources from them potentially to buy them. And, when there's emergencies happen, we're kind of in a good position to respond. We're in a much better position. Oh my God, compared to 2015, when the actual renovation happens, because we've laid so much groundwork with all these tenant leaders in the buildings who are meeting together regularly, who are partying together at Christmas parties, who are, these guys,
watching football.
Richard, watching football in their own hotel, but they're also inviting other hotel tenant leaders to come and see what they have at their hotel. Like, these guys are real mentors to the other hotels. So it's just about building that. And I just can't say enough about how important it is for policy wins that you've built the capacity in the hotels for the tenants to engage. Last thing to say before I turn it over to Andy is because we're solving a problem for governments and landlords in terms of providing this supportive but empowering program in the buildings, we've been successful at getting some pretty serious policy wins. The biggest policy win that we have that you guys should emulate is the SRO vacancy control. So basically, the landlords cannot change the rents between tenancies, during the tenancy or between tenancies. So that's given tenants a lot of affordability protection, and it's kind of insulated from rent eviction for gentrification. However, it has, I think, sped up foreclosures because some of the landlords are overextended with their mortgages and these aren't cash cows anymore on the books because they can't raise the rents to whatever they want. So there's a little flip side to that. But over to Andy to talk about how we bought buildings and what our obstacles are in terms of getting money to buy more. But go for it, Andy.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Andy Bond. I'm the executive director of the Land Trust. So I've been in this role almost 3 years, since 2023. But prior to that, I worked at one of the largest not-for-profits in Vancouver. And so I started in the 1990s, and that work was also in SROs. And we were kind of buying them and pioneering, I guess, what you'd call housing first. So we were housing kind of the most challenging people, pretty intense addiction issues, that kind of thing, in SROs. So a lot of experience running them. And that organization also did a lot of community development stuff. And we opened Insight, which is North America's first supervised injection site, a lot of social enterprises, everything through detox treatment centers, women's only housing, clothing shop, chocolate shop, coffee shop, a lot of stuff. And then I was kind of out of the neighborhood for a couple of years. living internationally. And then, but I was always staying in touch with Wendy and others. And basically, like she had said, they had started to get some traction. They got some funding towards starting the land trust, and it worked out for me to move back home. I had made a decision and I had moved to Ukraine, and then a war broke out. So I kind of was back and forth a bit during that war, but then needed to basically come back to Canada. So it worked out for me to come back. And a lot of the work I did at the other organization was what Wendy was saying. If you look at the downtown east side, currently there's about 7,000 SRO units. About half of those are owned by government and run in the way that I used to run them. And 8,000?
8,000.
8,000. Okay. Yeah. And about half of those are privately owned. So, Wendy and the SRC, they're doing all this great work organizing. They're in, I don't know, 40, 50 buildings, something like that, a big chunk of these private ones, and trying to figure out how to buy them. And land trusts in Canada, especially more on the East Coast and the other side of the country, we're getting more momentum and some media and having some success. They call them not SROs, rooming houses, I guess, but they same idea. And they were getting some success in buying them. So that was part of what Wendy and others looked to, because they knew they didn't want the same model of the type that I used to run, where the government buys and owns it, and they hire kind of a large not-for-profit that runs them in a way that isn't really building as much community, and have a little bit become more like warehousing, or, feel like heavy security and monitoring and cameras and that kind of thing. So they wanted to keep it independent and doing the great work they were doing. So that led to the land trust creation. And then when I started, Wendy and the SRC and others had formed the land trust and put together a big proposal to government to buy 8 hotels, and said we're going to run them just off the revenue from the commercial spaces. I think the cost was close to 100 million to buy that whole portfolio, but we were saying we didn't want any operating dollars. But of course, the government kind of said, no, who are you? You're newer. We're not going to buy 100 million, but we'll buy one building and we'll let you run it for a few years. And if you do a good job, then we'll talk about giving it to you. So they bought a building called Kiefer that had a fire, but it was a building that Wendy and the SRC were in. They knew the tenants, they knew the building really well. Those people have all been displaced to other places. It's taking forever, unfortunately, to fix the building. So we're now involved in that conversation, but it still won't be open for years, probably 2 more years till they finish all the renos. So then I was in the role. We had a building, but we had no really way to be demonstrating. So I immediately went out actually trying to get money to buy Richard's building, the Arlington, just because there was the owner was wanting to sell his whole portfolio. But the issue was there was no funding really available for SROs. And I'm sure it's similar where you are. They haven't had a great reputation in the media. Here, a lot of the politicians have kind of give up. They bought half the stock, and like Wendy said, they see it as an expensive headache. They don't want to invest more in it. They also will often, when I meet with them, tell me how SROs are not dignified housing. We need to do better for people, and that we shouldn't be buying SROs. And I always say I'm all for that. I don't think SROs are the best form of housing, but again, there's 8,000 units, and as soon as those 8,000 units are built and replaced, number one, and as soon as the 3,000 people still sleeping on the streets are no longer on the streets, then great, we will shut down the SROs. But to just sort of say they're not great housing, we don't want to buy them, and put your head in the sand is not much of a solution. And right now we're losing about, I think it's close to 19 units for every 1 unit that's coming online under $1,000 in BC. So that figure tells you that although the government's building what they call affordable housing, which is under $1,000, we're losing a massive amount. So they're just not keeping up with scale. So we feel it's really important to protect these buildings until there's enough replacement housing built. So anyway, I then started having different meetings, talking to fundraisers, applying to every fund that's available through the federal government, provincial government, city government, and all of them either wouldn't give money for SROs, or some of the big programs very intentionally excluded SROs. So you're not even allowed to apply. There is it's a good program, I would say, called the BC Rental Protection Fund that's designed for not-for-profits and land trusts to purchase buildings so they can try and stop REITs, the big redevelopment companies, BlackRocks of the world, from buying them. And it does help, but not really for the SRO population, or what we now call deeply affordable. For me, that's rents that are at $500 a month, income assistance level. So there's now a lot of programs, but they're geared at what they're starting to call the missing middle. That's a big popular term here. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone needs housing. I think that you should have all the programs, but the kind of people with the least money have been excluded the most. So how we bought the building then? Well, eventually there's a program called Reaching Home. So that's a federal program. They committed $1 million to us and said, if you can raise the rest in 2 years, we'll commit 1 million to purchase. So that got us going. But then from there, I continued, took about a year and a half to meet with a number of other organizations, funders, make formal applications, and it was really a challenge. We did start to have some success with philanthropy, partly because they were very familiar with the SROC and the good work that Wendy and Richard and everyone was doing. And there was one guy in Toronto that was really just supportive of land trusts. He's a very wealthy family, and he really liked the idea of, I write a check and the next week the community owns a building. And we had advocates in Toronto that liked our organization that had gotten money from this guy. He wasn't wanting to give money really on the West Coast. He was very focused on Toronto. But they roped him in. And so he gave us another 500,000. But unfortunately, to buy Richard's building, it's hard to make it break even. And we had sort of pooled two buildings together, and we needed about 10 million total to buy the buildings and do the renovations. So we had to make a difficult decision partway through to shift focus because we simply were not going to be able to raise the money that we needed, and we would have lost the million we had. So our board and our community land trust met with all the members, and we have a whole decolonized Indigenous governance component that I won't get into, but we met with all of them, and I run every decision by that group, and we said, and to people like Richard, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to buy your hotel now. So let's look at what else is on the market. So at least our land trust can buy one. And then we ended up finding this building, Powell Rooms, that couldn't have been a better fit. It's a 23-unit SRO, and it had been run by a couple. She had been a social worker, and they had run it more or less as a philanthropic private endeavor. They had not raised rents ever. The average rent in the hotel when we bought it was $485 per tenant. So that's less than the income assistance rate. On the ground floor, there was a community daycare program where the landlord was donating their rent back to them to help them get started and get off the ground. And him and his wife, they had worked with some nonprofits to try and run it for the last several years. They'd just been doing it themselves. His wife had passed away recently, and he was about 76. So he really wanted an out, and his building was just for sale. And it was very much being marketed to developers. It had pictures on the brochures of how you could build a big 32-story condo tower. The daycare were terrified and actively searching for new spaces. The tenants were very concerned as well. And then I basically reached out, started meeting with him, negotiated the price. He went down quite a lot from asking. He was asking about 2.5 million. By the end, we paid $1.8 million for the building. And we had also, at the last minute, we got funding from CMHC. So that's the big federal program in Canada. They have a thing called the Innovation Fund. And they gave us 1.2 million towards the purchase and renovations, with the innovation being a community land trust owning a building and keeping it deeply affordable and running it without a subsidy. So we get no operating subsidy. Luckily, our land trust has some funding up front, so our salaries are covered and we don't need to support ourselves from the rents. And then we have some money that goes to the private property manager that we work with, and then just to supporting the general costs of electricity and everything. And we also raised the money to do the renos up front, so we wouldn't be stuck with a building that was deteriorating, and we would be able to fix it. So we already are almost halfway through the renovations. We redone the kitchen, we painted the building, changed the door locks, and we're now submitting a permit to the city for the more comprehensive redo of the washrooms and the heating system and the boiler and hot water and all that. So that's how we bought the building. And then basically CMHC, I mean, everyone's been happy so far. They actually give us a little more money to make a little movie about it. So we're working on that with some filmmakers that made a movie called Love in the Time of Fentanyl in Vancouver. And they have done a lot of mini documentaries on stuff here. So they've been filming and doing interviews with a bunch of the tenants and this kind of thing. And so we'll have a little movie about how the Community Land Trust came together to buy this building. And then I applied again to Reaching Home. They were happy we were able to get a building, and they committed another 500,000 to once again try and buy the Arlington. So we now have 2 years to raise the money for that one. So we're kind of back doing that. And then the other building, the Kiefer building that I talked about, that's being renovated by the government, and we will run that and operate it along with the SROC when it's completed. And hopefully the province will transfer ownership. It's looking more likely that that will happen. And then as we've started to get, I'll almost wrap it up here, but as we've started to kind of get more attention in the community and a few little positive media stories, and the word is growing, and they can see we're operating our building without any big issues and improving things. Another organization actually that's sort of run by the city of Vancouver, connected to it, called Metro Vancouver. They own a couple of, they're not technically SROs, but they're almost considered that in the building. And they actually approached us because they don't want to operate the buildings in this neighborhood anymore. And we're working through now an arrangement for them to give us one of their buildings for basically $1 to just take it off their hands and operate it. So I'm just trying to make the numbers work and stuff. So it's a long, slow start, and Wendy and Richard and everyone was working for years before anything happened. And then I was here for about 3 years working full time on this before we actually got the building. So it does take time, but once you get some momentum, things do start happening, and I'm really confident we will get the Arlington. So yeah, I think that's all I got.
My name is Rostin. I don't have any real special role here, except I help put together some of the stuff that's on the walls, and we're kind of just trying to create this as a space for us all to just learn about, what's going on with SROs down here, and ways that things could be better. So being able to speak with you all and learn from you all is a great it's a great opportunity for us. I feel like I just have a couple really simple questions, and I really do want to open it up to I think there's a lot of questions probably in this room from folks who've been doing organizing and kind of have a deeper sense of the nitty-gritty of what the differences are. But I just wanted to kind of maybe flesh out some of what you all are doing. It seems like you all kind of know how to renovate a building and run it. And so I'm just curious, where you got that expertise, or how did you learn to do this? Is this something you're learning on the job? And I guess related to that, I'm curious if you have ideas of once you own the building, you finish renovating it, how are you going to run it? How's it going to be run differently than maybe the other buildings? Do you have ideas of how you want to do it? I'm just curious to kind of know about, and going along with that, what will the rents be? Who's going to live there? Is it going to be all the same existing tenants? Do you have a process for who might become a tenant if there's openings, that kind of thing?
Andy, you should talk about that.
Yeah, I can jump in. I guess so the first part about renovating and that whole piece about buildings, I have that experience from my previous job. So at PHS, we were really I think by the end there was 12 SROs that I was responsible for, and I was involved in the development of new housing, including big development partnerships with people like Westbank and the Woodwards development, which here is a massive condo tower that had a social housing component. But we also had a lot of SROs that went through various stages of renovations. So I kind of learned that on the job. Some of it was things where we were directly getting the quotes and I was overseeing the workers myself. I worked, front desk in SROs for about 14 years, including started in weekend night shifts right at Main and Hastings for about 5 years, and kind of worked my way up to eventually be in the executive director position, but that was over a 20-year period. So I had a good 12 years of just very front line, which was kind of, I would consider it my greatest education, because I was so exposed to tenants and how they were actually living, and hearing their stories over and over, and that, impacted me deeply. And I can't, it was just, you couldn't get that at any university, I would say. So I learned a lot there around that. And then, but if you look at Powell, for example, and I also know some other people that I used to work with, so we're just really lucky that this guy, Tom Laviolette, that I had worked with a long time, who did a lot of the development and construction stuff, is now doing consulting. So when we got Powell rooms to do the renos, I hired a consultant. And that's kind of how we envision doing it when we buy a building, because we want to keep our land trust staff team quite small, so we don't have to start doing a lot. So or we don't start getting bogged down with a lot of staff. We just really want to focus on buying the buildings, get it renovated, and then try and have the money when we buy a building that I can hire the consultants I need to oversee the renos. So we kind of now are like a team doing it, meeting with the architects, figuring out the hazmat, the different contractors, and kind of together we're doing it. We also have a private property manager that has been working in some of the buildings, like the one Richard lives in, and a lot of the buildings the SROC is in, who is very efficient, runs like kind of runs them strict as they need to be, but is all like he isn't overly strict, and he'll listen to Wendy and us and kind of work around not doing eviction. But it's not the housing I used to run where people we had a no eviction. We literally would not evict people unless it was a physical assault issue with the police. So he will evict people if they're, really breaking the Tenancy Act or disturbing their neighbor, that kind of thing. But generally, he works with us to run the buildings in a, slightly different way. So, and then in terms of tenant selection and how that will work, when I'm talking to funders and whatnot, we kind of describe it as another step on the housing continuum of SROs, because there's really been one use that the government see, which is the supportive housing. Take a bunch of the people that basically are coming right out of shelter or have been kicked out of all other forms of housing that have very complex needs, put them all in one big building, and then throw a lot of staff and money in there and try and make it all stick together. I'm being a little like, flippant about it or whatever. And there are a lot of people that do good work there, and I ran a lot of those buildings. It's not, it's not all bad or anything, but we're kind of saying, hey, there's another way to get more life out of SROs, and there's a lot of tenants that can do a lot on their own. And there are a lot of people that can live more independently that just don't have a lot of money for rent. So the issue is we need to hold on to these buildings and keep the rents at 500, but with the support of SROC, they can do a lot of the work. So that's kind of how we envision tenanting would be kind of through, there's such a great need that we know of. And just like Wendy's and the SRC are in about 40 or 50 buildings. So they're always knowing great people that are, for whatever reason, in a precarious housing situation or getting kicked out of housing or that kind of thing, or people that would be a good fit in the buildings. So that's kind of how we'll do that. The building that we bought is already tenanted. So, and it's interesting because some of the tenants are, probably could use some higher level of support than what we're able to do, but we're doing our best to manage it all right now. So yeah, hopefully that answers it. I don't know if Wendy wants to add.
Yeah, I just add 1 minute of extra just to say that having the private property manager, having a good caretaker. I love the caretaker model, the live-in manager who's a peer to the tenant population. They're actually I tell them the caretakers in front of the tenants because they end up playing a dual role, like they balance out the tenants and the management. But it's an ancient role being a caretaker. And in fact, the god Janus, the Roman god Janus, is the god of janitors. He was a caretaker. He stood on the threshold of the door with a key. He had two faces. You could look him up. And when I found that, I'm like, oh my God, of course. Because I always try to pick off or peel away the caretaker, get the caretaker on our side. And the tenants when they start to work with the caretaker and things start to get a lot smoother in the building with our tenant-based initiatives, it's kind of like has been the key to stabilizing the buildings and making them better places to live. So our model is pretty unique, and we haven't had a chance to write about it. Our new housing model that we're developing, which includes, the land trust dealing with the land and the elders and the community, the private property manager who's kind of straight-laced and kind of a bit of a bad cop. We need a bad cop in there sometimes, and then we have the caretaker who we've kind of won over, and the caretaker, make sure that the property manager thinks it's their idea, about what we need. And then all of the tenant leadership that we're constantly germinating and encouraging and creating structures for tenant leadership where those tenants are having a lot of tenant to tenant. We pay them honorariums. That's key too. I don't know if you can do that in the States, but our governments will actually give us grants knowing that we're actually giving money under the table to people to work. Like, I don't know how we did that in the downtown east side. That's a whole other hour and a half of how that happened.
Cool.
So being able to pay people $25 of cash for an hour, they get 3 hours a week of work to do their role is so great. And the private landlords are doing that. They're paying everybody under the table to do little bits of work. So, you know, we don't want to become like a nonprofit. We're trying to keep the best of the privately owned model of what we see and create something different that's a lot cheaper to subsidize. So sorry to go on, keep that, but that's my try to answer your question about our model.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly what we want to hear about. I mean, the exhibit here, you know, it's called, you know, Hotels in Crisis Again. And, you know, there was a period in Skid Row where you had a lot of hotels that were shutting down. Nonprofits came and took them over. It sounds, you know, somewhat parallel to what has happened there. And then now those nonprofits are folding, not doing a great job of what they're supposed to be doing. And so, you know, one of the things we're really interested in is figuring out, like, how does something like what you've got now, the community land trust, not just end up being the same thing again? You know, how do you know, what is that relationship between the tenants and the tenant ownership and tenant control and the community land trust, which is kind of a nonprofit, right? So like, how is this kind of like moving forward in the model, I guess, is something I'd love to kind of just get in the weeds with, how you kind of think about that relationship. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, maybe we could, at some point, somebody could do a step by step what we think others could do if they wanted to emulate our model, like how to start.
Empowering the tenants is
Yeah.
one good thing.
Yes. And how to do that. And that every time I take people on tours a lot, like the bureaucrats, each one of them I take, like from the city and the province, and not so much the feds. We're a little remote from the feds, and the politicians. And each one of them gets totally enamored by the model when they hear the tenants talk about their role in the building. And it just motivates them to do policy change that we need to give us more money for tenant-based initiatives. But the big ceiling that we've got to punch through is they don't have an acquisition program. They don't have a steady stream of money for us. It just doesn't exist, as Andy was trying to explain with that rental protection fund. It just doesn't exist in Canada yet. A stream of capital funding that we're eligible for. I think the governments would rather see these buildings blown up, as Richard just whispered. They'd like to turn them into giant towers and have people sprinkled in, but that's just totally unrealistic. And not appropriate. Like these communities, like Richard, they're running their own seniors home. That's how I look at it there at the Arlington. You want to keep that community together. Either you got to buy their building and fix it up, or you got to move them all together into their own building, which, you know, nobody wants to pay for any of this. So we're in a real pickle.
They kind of talk about it, but
yeah,
there's no real action behind it. What would happen would be we would be spread apart.
yeah.
Too much lip service sometimes.
So I have like a big list of questions here, but I actually wanted to maybe skip to like getting questions from this group, and then I can maybe add some more back in at the end. But I know that you all have, I had a feeling we'd get them right out of the gate.
Yeah, hi, my name is Poppy, and I have a couple of questions. One of which is, it sounds like this is basically market rate housing, correct? Or vaguely market rate housing. You're talking about rent increases and affordability and $400 or $500 a month. That's very different than here. Is that correct?
When they use the term here, market rate, that usually would mean higher. So when I'm saying here, basically a lot of people living in the SROs are possibly on pension or primarily on income assistance or welfare. So and in Canada, the government gives people $500, or in BC, they give them $500 a month for rent, and that's it. So we consider that we want the housing to be at that rate, because beyond the 500, they're given such a small amount of money. It's insane that people are trying to live off of it. So that a lot of affordability programs that are out there, they use the word affordable all over the place. But the question has become affordable for who? Because most affordable programs are not at $500 a month. They're much higher. So what we're doing is trying our best to run the housing and keep it 100%. Now the word I started using is deeply affordable, income assistance rate. So we don't really want to be raising it a lot. You know, we're also trying to work with government around rent supplements because there are rent supplement programs in Canada, but it's it's good to have the right rent supplements to help people with housing, but it's not good because all the programs are very much specifically geared to the private market. So a nonprofit usually can't really get a rent subsidy. They're fine to give it to a private market person. So he can just keep raising his rents, or she, and get extra money from the government. So other countries do not do it like that, and they allow not-for-profits to take advantage because eventually our costs will go up. So it's pretty hard when I do a pro forma, even for the Powell rooms, and I start projecting out 10 years, if the rent stays at 500, because there just simply is inflation and electricity costs and everything goes up. And if you're not raising the rents, how do you make it all work? But yeah, like, so for us, we're really focused on trying to keep it as deeply affordable as we can.
Okay, and another question is, you mentioned briefly something about placing high needs people in SROs. Like, what percentage of the tenant population would you consider to be high acuity or high needs or something like that?
I mean, so if you go to the ones that are run by nonprofits, especially the nonprofit that I was working for, I mean, it's probably 80 to 90% in some of the buildings I'm thinking of very high needs, meaning, very severe entrenched addictions combined with the mental health diagnosis, and sometimes combined with serious health diagnoses. Very common to see brain injury mixed with schizophrenia, mixed with a lot of severe IV injection drug use constantly, survival sex trade work, etc. in a large portion of the supportive housing buildings. There are other people, like there's a mix, it's not all like, and even at PHS, we had other buildings that were kind of meant for people moving away from addiction. So they wouldn't be a hard, like, this is a set no drug and alcohol, but it would be people trying to move away from it. Yeah. So
in the privately owned, so half of our hotels are owned by government and fit what Andy just described, but the other half are owned by a whole bunch of different private landlords. And there's a real mix in there, but they tend to house more of the independent tenants like Richard, and the semi-independent tenants that need just a little bit of light support in order to be able to keep their tenancy, stay in good with the landlord. And actually there's usually a sprinkling, like 3, 4, 5, or 5%, 10% of people who actually need deep support, who either eventually evolved to needing deeper support, or slipped in somehow. The landlord let them in and can't get rid of them, or and our guys look after those guys.
And I would say, like, at the PHS buildings, it would be totally impossible for a private landlord to operate them the way that we operate, because we have a no eviction policy. If someone destroys their room because of mental illness and whatnot, they're not doing it because they're a bad person. We understand all that. So we will work to just basically give them a new room, or we'll be creative around enforcing it with special plywood and a more stainless steel sink, etc. Right? But that comes from government subsidy. It has to, and they support that because they see that it's more cost effective and more humane than a bunch of people being on the street and whatnot. Like, we were able to prove that earlier, that it was better to invest in the housing.
In the year 2000. When the government bought all those hotels.
Yeah.
The privates are kind of a unique group of people like Richard and others.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Poppy. Maybe if I could maybe just push that question a little further. I feel like part of what, if I'm understanding, part of the reason for the question is like, we get this sense, I don't know, I always have this sense that like Canada broadly just has a more humane government than we do. So I think, you talk about like, oh, the government believes that this is a good policy. You know, there's things like I don't think that our government actually does believe that some of those things are good policies here yet. And so I'm just curious more broadly, and this is maybe a question for all of us to answer together, but like, what are the differences in terms of the environment? You know, what are the things that you are able to do maybe because you have a more humane government, or maybe not? Like, how different is it, I guess, is the
It's
question.
different. I think I watch US politics and try to follow what's going on there. I think the United States has better social housing policy than we have in Canada now. Unfortunately, our government stopped investing in building lots of social housing in the 90s and then the early 2000s. They really divested themselves from that responsibility, and that's why we have so many homeless people now. Like, we're just not doing well. But in the downtown east side, it's kind of like, so there's so many people working for we pull off some one-offs here and there. We pull off the exceptions. That's my rule, my view of it. And the reason we got our start is we have a progressive premier of our province. It's like your state representative. We have a really progressive premier who used to work in the neighborhood. So he's got a heart for what we're doing. So we got our start. And, you know, we figured out how to get more conservative city government on board recently. But Terry mentioned that I worked with the legendary Jean Swanson in the downtown east side. We got Jean elected to council in 2018. That was critical, getting her there. She was our voice in council, helped us get SRO vacancy control. So it's all politics. You know, it'll be all politics for you guys too, in terms of how do you get the money to do this? Are you going for philanthropy, private philanthropy? Are you going for government money? Is there government money available? Like the downtown east side, we have some expertise in terms of navigating all that crazy stuff because we've been mentored, you know, for a couple of generations. The older generations are mentoring the younger generations. And a lot of relationship development, like a lot of relationships with the politicians and the bureaucrats to pry some money away from them to do what we need to do. But it's not ideal here. Canada has a healthcare system that we can be proud of. Universal healthcare, which is amazing, but we do not have universal housing. We're not like Finland. We should all go to Finland. They've sort of figured everything out there, from what I can see, in Vienna.
And no rent.
Yeah. But we're not there. So it's a little different, you know, you guys would probably have just a different terrain to navigate. I don't know if that answers what's different.
I think it starts to, and I think we'll probably keep on returning. We've got another question.
We do. Hello, folks. My name is Eric. I'm a peer support specialist with a nonprofit in South LA. So my question was for Andy. I was struck by a comment that he made about keeping affordable housing and keeping rent below 500 and renting to people who perhaps are used to paying rent and used to maintaining housing. So the idea of opening some of these SROs up for general rental amongst general people. I'm really familiar with supportive housing and the issues involved with supportive housing, and I certainly support the efforts to support clients and people who, in their housing, despite some of the difficulties. But the idea of maintaining some affordable housing for people who need low income, or deeply affordable, I believe was the phrase. And I was wondering what you folks had to say about the possibilities of opening up some of these SRO housing for that. A lot of the SRO housing here in LA is privately owned at this point in downtown Skid Row. And I don't think I'm not sure how they would react to that. But if you had any comments about that, I'd appreciate to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, I think that is sort of what we are doing is, the SROC are in there providing what we often call light supports, but there are people in the private buildings that are just, just don't have a lot of money for rent and are kind of living there independently. I mean, I guess sometimes to get funding, and we don't have funding for our building yet from the government, but for the Kiefer Hotel, when it opens, for example, they know that it's not supportive housing. It's not going to be staffed in that way, but we will take referrals of people who are in supportive housing that just simply want to move to more independent housing with lower rent. And even all the programs that SROC are doing or that we have in Powell, no one has to take part in any of it. I mean, generally, you want people that are invested, and a lot of people naturally are interacting in some way. But in Powell, there's some people that are they just want the low rent and they're going about their day, and that's kind of it. So I think that we are, yeah, trying to do that, just low income housing. I mean, the SROs are not great. I don't think that people should be charged much more than that minimum amount. But yeah, I think that's it. Hopefully answers it.
Hi, Andy. I am very interested to hear a little bit more, if you could expound upon the commercial space on the bottom of some of your SROs and how that is able to sustain certain SROs, and how the tenants, maybe or maybe not, I don't know how it will work, choose the tenants, what kind of tenants, how this works, because in Skid Row, on one of the borders of Skid Row Main Street, we have a slew of SROs, many which have been renovated within the past 15 years, that have totally empty and very large commercial spaces that have, some of them, never been rented because the nonprofits, wink, wink, wanted to get, bars in there, which the community feels, for various reasons that I totally agree with, are not appropriate for a lot of the tenants that are often going through recovery. Sorry. Oh, they're going through recovery. So it's like, but they're all, a lot of, on Main Street specifically, let's just say like 6 or 7 SROs. All these large commercial spaces are all graffitied and like windows messed up, and it's like, it's depressing for everybody, including the tenants, and they're empty, huge spaces that are empty. So this, to me, is a massive opportunity for the tenants if they were to be able to choose and figure out who they would want to be in these spaces. But how does that work? Thank you.
Sure, yeah, great question. I'll kind of go through it in 2 parts. One, I'll refer a little bit back to when I was at PHS, because there's been, I mean, the neighborhood is always changing in different ways. But when I started in the late 90s, I mean, there was basically zero appetite for people to use commercial spaces. And the government started buying the SROs when I was working in them. And I can think of real examples, like one's called the Washington Hotel, one's called the Sunrise Hotel. So I'll just stick with those 2. And they had a band and the Stanley Hotel. So we'll take those 3. And they all had nothing on the ground floor, and no one wanted to rent them. And our nonprofit was pretty, I don't know, like inspiring and overachievers, and did a lot.
Entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneurial, there you go. And just our experience of being in the housing, we could see all kinds of like, we started just running housing, and then we're like, oh man, first of all, people are dying all over the place. We needed a supervised injection site. That was one of the big things that came out of it. But also, people need somewhere to do their laundry. People need a bank. And so in the Sunrise Hotel, we opened a little cafe. And again, we kind of used people in the community to work, and it was opening to people living in the community. And we opened something called Wishy Washy Laundry. It was run by a woman named Cheryl, who still lives in the community, and people could bring laundry in there. And a lot of community groups and social workers started meeting because they wanted to support it. Then we had the Washington Hotel. We started something called the Washington Food Store. A lot of people didn't even have enough money to buy a whole box of cereal and stuff like that. So we would go buy it at Costco in bulk and put it into little bags and sell it for 50 cents and stuff like this. And those were little businesses that were basically social enterprises. Some of them didn't make any money. We also opened, on one of the ground floor retail spaces, we partnered with Vancity, a credit union, because so many people in the neighborhood couldn't access banking services. So that was a bigger, more complicated project, but we opened a community bank called Pigeon Park Savings that still goes to this day, busiest Vancity branch in the country, and just sees a massive amount of people. And we also did unique things in that bank. They really were honest about security. And we said, no, we're going to hire 2 people from community to do security. Bank never had a security guard. Everyone would line up on check day. It would kind of self-police because people didn't want an incident to happen because they wanted their money. So we did a lot of stuff like that. And in the Stanley Hotel, we worked with an Indigenous woman who is a carver and carving a pole, which Terry here worked on this as well. And we basically gave her a space because she couldn't afford to pay, but she was doing a really honorable thing to build a totem pole for murdered and missing women. We had a vintage store that sold used, like a thrift store. So people worked in it from the Rainier Hotel, which is a women's only treatment center we opened. We opened a bean to bar coffee shop that made coffee and chocolate called East Van Roasters, and we gave jobs to the women that were going through recovery. Some of these things have since failed. It was very hard to make money at them. The vintage clothing store actually paid for most of the other businesses. That one somehow was quite successful. So that's kind of how, that's one thing that sounds similar to your situation. There just wasn't a lot of, you couldn't rent it to anyone, and the province just let us do whatever we wanted with them. However, over time, as the neighborhood started to change more and gentrify more, they started to not be so lenient, and they did not let us do whatever we want. And eventually they formed their own sort of not-for-profit that then took over all those spaces and changed them and started trying to monetize them more. And if you go now to the Sunrise, it makes me angry, and I walk by it every day. It's just totally boarded up and there's nothing in there. So that kind of thing happens. And then for our land trust, when they put together that bigger proposal and tried to buy all the buildings, a lot of them already have buildings. Some of them were bars. One of them's a restaurant that's sort of already been upscaled or gentrified. It's like a fine enough restaurant, but I mean, the people who live in the community can't really afford to work there. Maybe some of the staff can, but even then, but at the same time, we kind of look at it as a collective whole of buying the buildings, and some businesses we might not love. I mean, with Powell Rooms, the one we bought, it's unique because that's a after school childcare program. So you couldn't have, and they're funded well enough that they're able to pay $5,000 a month. So that's $60,000 a year that then offsets the cost of operating the building. It's how we're making it break even without a subsidy. And that one, we're just kind of lucky. It's such a perfect thing where they're already established. It's a wonderful program. And they're the ones that are offsetting and making the rents affordable upstairs. In the Kiefer Rooms, which is the one the province bought, there was a historic restaurant. Wendy could talk more about this, called the Gainois, that was really meaningful to the, it's basically in Chinatown. This building was meaningful to the community. That unfortunately is where the fire started that more or less destroyed the building. But there are efforts. The family don't want to run the business anymore, but there's a group of people that are really involved and invested now in reopening that business and making it affordable for people to live there and integrating food support programs and that kind of thing into that commercial space. So it can be a challenging mix because in some ways, if we're the owner and we have this commercial space, we kind of need to make money. We would like to just do, like, we can't give a big discount to the people trying to do the restaurant, because the most important thing, if it has some value, is to try and get rent to offset the tenants above. But of course, we still want to work with businesses that are hopefully thoughtful of the community and doing some good. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Wendy, but.
No, that was good, Andy. The challenge is we need operating dollars maybe at some point, but governments are not forthcoming here. In time, we might have to accept the more expensive retail that in some of the buildings, or buy one with expensive retail in order to cross-subsidize a cheaper building with cheaper rents.
It also gets into a lot of complexity that I won't go down too much of a rabbit hole, but about, like, we technically are a not-for-profit. It gets a little confusing with the land trust. It's not a legal trust or something like that. I mean, it really is a not-for-profit. That's a land trust in name, and in governance is different. But when you start having buildings that have a business renting from you and you're making income, even if it's going back in, it can get complicated with charitable status and the structure. Like we do have lawyers that are really good and smarter than me at this kind of thing. So they are helping guide us. But some of the bigger not for land trusts here in Canada do have almost like siloed off sections. There's the charitable wing and there's the profit wing that can actually make money from a commercial enterprise and dump it back in, and stuff like that can get a little complicated too.
Thank you.
Unless there's I kind of want to get even further into the weeds of that question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I started to realize I was losing track of like who we was when you were talking about like, and then we did this.
Right.
So you probably covered this at some point, but if you could step through kind of what is the relationship between the entity that Wendy is part of and the Community Land Trust? And also it sort of seems like the thing that Wendy's been describing has a kind of status at a building level. And then there's also sort of like some sort of thing that arches between different buildings where you're doing organizing across buildings. And I don't really have a sense of how it all fits together. So if you all could sort of like sketch your part of the elephant for us to kind of help understand how these things fit together.
Well, if I had time to do a slide deck, which I didn't have time to do, I would have showed you a picture of like the 50 buildings that we're in with the little photos of the tenant leaders in each building. We have it downstairs, and maybe I'll send you a picture afterwards. But if you can imagine 50 buildings and some of them have 6 tenant leaders doing 6 different roles, like the food and like what Richard does and the cleaning guy. And, if you can imagine 6 different roles in each building. Some of the buildings, we only have 1 or 2 people in the roles just because we don't have enough resources to fully populate that building with the tenant leaders. And then if you can imagine, if Richard is doing a role in his hotel at the Arlington, and he's the only one doing that role in his building, well, there's another building 2 doors down that has another person doing Richard's role, the same role. So those tenants are meeting, supporting each other here at the collaborative, the role that Richard's doing. And then and then we're also getting all of the tenants together for parties, for policy change stuff, for meetings, for workshops. And then each building gets together too. The lead tenant team gets together and talks about how to support each other in their roles and how to, at the end of every meeting, I was looking at their minutes because the staff take notes. They're asking the question, do you see any evictions coming up? Do we see as a group any evictions potentially brewing? What can we do about them to stop them? So the tenants are involved in that discussion. They're like, yeah, you go talk to him. I'll go talk to the caretaker, blah, blah, blah. So they're helping to prevent evictions. So that's kind of the broad strokes. And then we have like multiple funders funding each one of those programs. So they're invested in different ways, like the harm reduction program that we have. We have a fund, the health authority funds it. The nurses, everybody's, we're networking that our staff are networking with the funders and the supports around supporting that one role. And then how do we relate to the land trust? We decided not to be on the board. So we want them to be like, there's kind of a separation between church and state. We're there for the tenants, and the tenants have a voice. We want the land trust to own the buildings and to have the private property manager and the caretaker in place. And we'll keep doing the tenant support program, our version of tenant support program, which is a lot cheaper than putting actual real staff in the building, social service staff, and just keep nurturing the communities to support each other in the building and to do that tenant to tenant relationship work that they do. Like Richard's like getting people's groceries, and he's just doing it because of friendships now. Or going and picking up somebody's prescription at the pharmacy for them, or they're calling somebody's family member for them. So we're just trying to keep it a bit separate. But we go to the elder tenant committee meetings, like Andy's got we created an elder advisory group, a native elder advisory group, and we have the most awesome elders on this territory involved. And there's a committee of tenants that meet there too, but the collaborative goes as well, just so it's kind of holistic and complicated.
Yeah.
But that's where a lot of consensus emerges there in terms of what to do about issues. And people are growing and learning about the bigger picture of, what we're trying to achieve. And working, regular meetings are really important, like regular and structures are really important for people. We started the land trust by basically having a meeting every Friday on Zoom for about 5 years. And people, some of the elders and some of the staff of the collaborative and the new staff like Andy at the land trust, we all converge on Fridays on Zoom too. That one's evolving into other ways. But having our first pilot building where we're working together at Powell Rooms is really cool, where we're putting in our tenant-based initiative programs in that building, the full team, and Andy's doing the property management, basically supervising the property management. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think like Wendy's done so much organized, like Terry said in the intro or wrote, Wendy's been around a long time and has been doing organizing and has sometimes maybe been the pointy end of the stick. I think some of the politicians are a little scared they don't want to be on the bad side of Wendy. So she's managed to get this funding, but it's amazing. I don't know if I've told you this, Wendy, but how many people say to me, oh, Wendy's really changed a little. She's sort of like getting things done now, and she's a little more pragmatic. And so Wendy's got the funding, and they're maybe all a little scared, but definitely has done some media and attention, and people want to help, and has been at this organizing in the SROs. And I think especially the city staff see the difference it's making, so they're very supportive. And then the land trust came kind of on the back of that. We're able to be so associated, and it took me a while in this role also to figure it out exactly, but because the first big grant that the land trust got was to create what we call the decolonized governance structure, and it pays for these meetings for 3 years. They've been happening. We just got renewed funding for another 3, so we're good. And these meetings are about 17 SRO tenants. So they're just from SROs that Wendy and others had identified as people to be involved, mixed with Indigenous elders. And the two groups come together. And at first, some of the meetings, there was a lot of tension. And the idea is learning about, having the blessing of Indigenous peoples here, and also just learning from Indigenous practices and how they do governance. And so they do real things about voting pairs and about, we're playing with different ways of how decisions will get made. We run through exercises with tenants about things like overnight guests or should there be pets in the building. But then we don't do just a straight majority vote. We'll work through it in other ways. We'll have pairs that are usually balanced with gender. So there's all kinds of things, and we haven't landed on anything. We're just experimenting with all these different ideas. And then also there are other community partners that come to those meetings, like Vancouver Aboriginal Policing Center, Aboriginal Front Door that runs a drop-in and a night shelter. SROC are there, Powell Street Festival. So there's a bunch of community groups that have been taking part since the beginning as well. So we're all sort of integrated in that way. And then you go narrow it into the land trust, and we do need to be making real decisions about real estate. We can't buy every building that we want. We have to look at what's for sale, and I have to try and raise money accordingly. But anytime that there are decisions, like when we were trying to buy the Arlington and we had to switch, I don't just say, oh, we're going to buy this one now. Like I bring it to that committee. Everyone agrees. I talk through the reasoning. Usually everyone understands, as they did in this instance. It made sense for our land trust to buy this building. So that's kind of how it all works. But, like we kind of know which buildings to buy because they're already in them. They've already done all the hard work of forming communities and identifying, there's both the community aspect, and then there's is the building about to fall over? Does it still have some life left? Those kind of questions. And then what is actually for sale? And there's been a lot of foreclosures happening now. And unfortunately, as Wendy said, there's not money for us to buy them. So some of the nefarious landlords are swooping in now because the bottom's falling out here. Our housing market's on a bit of a downturn after a very lengthy rocket upwards. And the SROs are feeling the impact of that, I think, more than anything, partly because of vacancy control, but just partly because of the general market conditions where a lot of owners are over leveraged and their mortgages are jumping up, and they had hoped the province and government would buy their buildings, but they're not buying them. So now there's a fire sale happening for SROs.
So what I'm getting, it was very organic, very relationship based.
Yeah.
Along with that, were there any models or examples in other countries, maybe even Montreal? So was there something that you learned or experienced that you brought into this that helped facilitate kind of the grassroots relationship building? Or was it really like relationship by relationship and you had no model?
Well, I'll jump in first, but the SRO Collaborative, the work in San Francisco with their collaboratives, I learned a little bit there from them. I learned about, the need to support tenants more, to come together and take leadership in their buildings. The Central City SRO Collaborative in San Francisco was doing this work in nonprofit buildings. And I wanted to do this work in privately owned buildings. So that's pretty unique. But I don't think anybody's doing this anywhere else in Canada or in the States. I think we have invented something completely unique. Maybe somebody will show me something different. But the downtown east side is unique. And we're like the old growth forest of organizing. You could go into a forest and then you go into an old growth forest. And there's a difference because it's so layered, upon layered, and the relationships and the history and the organizing is so dense. When I went to San Francisco, I felt like that too. I was like, oh, I'm in an old growth forest of organizing. Like there was just layer upon layer of history, experience, like people with experience. So I think we don't know what we don't know. We have a hard time. I think I have a hard time seeing the forest through the trees. I'm just kind of immersed in this history and culture and training. And, we know who's good at stuff and who we can trust. We've like we've been through a constellation of mistakes. And, we look for people who've been around for a long time to get involved. Like Terry, I just poached him to be on our board. I'm like, who have I known since the 90s or the 80s?
Before.
Be known. So I think that really helps. So it's, finding your way. But I wish we had other examples that we could draw on who've done this, but I really think we're inventing something new here. Andy, I don't know. The land trust,
Yeah, I think
a little less so, but definitely the collaborative.
Yeah, like the land trust definitely. There's a newer organization I'm actually now on the board of called Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts, and it's quite compared to a lot of housing organizations. It's like quite political, I guess, and but focused on land trusts. And there are a lot of them emerging in Canada. And then I guess we've also looked, like we just recently got funding to do a study of acquisition programs. Because like we said, there's no program dedicated to buying SROs or funding available. So we looked at Toronto does have a good program called MURA, Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program. And there's one in a small site acquisition program in Seattle.
San Francisco too.
San Francisco, yeah. So we looked at about 4 or 5 different cities. So, definitely there were learnings there. CMHC paid us to do it, and we've made policy recommendations based on that. So there is a little bit more, like we're able to, still our governance is very different. And just because we're so linked with SROC, and that form of tenant organizing is very different than any of the other cities. But in terms of just more basic land trust 101 and, how they're structured legally and ideas around funding and starting funding programs, from there we are learning from other people and continue to do so. Yeah.
We don't have all our funding yet for the collaborative. and the land trust, we basically got 5 years worth of funding covered very generously by our state or province. So it was a one-time only grant, but it was huge. It was huge. So we've been living nicely off of that, but it's going to run out in 2028.
Yeah.
We're just in the process of trying to get them to make a decision about whether they're going to keep us going. And it would be totally scandalous to let us go, and totally scandalous to let this housing go. So they know they're in a pickle because the tenants have really are contributing a lot. And the city just wrote us the city of Vancouver, our municipality, just wrote us a support letter, saying this is all the stuff we do with the collaborative. So collaborative means collaborating. So we're as I tell people, it's iterative, and the enemy gets a bit of a vote. So even the conservative government gets they're influencing our strategy too. So, they do have a say in, the direction of which way we go and what we do. But they like our programs, and they like what we're doing around fire safety and extreme heat mitigation and harm reduction and recovery navigation, and, and they're fundable projects. They're very fundable. So I think the revolution can be funded. That's my message. LAPD. How the revolution is getting funded. And when I meet with the tenants, the thing I tell them is, it's you guys. We're not going to get your building, no grant thing or thing, the right word that we're going to say to the politician is going to suddenly make us be able to buy your buildings. You guys got to bring your community together and prove to the politicians that you've got it, that you're worth investing. You've got a community. So that's kind of how we do it.
Well, you're kind of beating me to it, but I'm hoping to kind of close out this session with maybe just one question for each of you to answer, which is just sort of, is there a lesson that you think is portable from all that you've been through, the mistakes you've made, that you're sort of like, here's what you'd want us, trying out these kinds of things here. What's a lesson that you've learned that you'd like to pass on?
Explore the tenant-based initiatives model, because it could actually be your way to infiltrate into these privately owned buildings in ways that you don't have to ask permission of the landlord. And maybe you can get funders on board for little projects to get you going. That's a lesson based on not on mistakes, but on actually fixing our mistakes. Rather than doing the advocacy around habitability or living conditions, focus more on the capacity building of the tenants. It's fundable, and it will build your capacity to then start to look at buildings that you want to purchase, and give you some credentials that, governments and funders will be like, yeah, these people are doing good work. Let's invest in them.
Yeah. I think one of the lessons is just around patience, I guess. It really felt hopeless at times. Like I had this job and was trying to buy buildings, and I just felt like it's never going to happen. I'm going down, I've applied for every grant there is to apply for. I've asked every person. I just can't figure out how we're going to get it done. And that story is kind of true for every land. I mean, some of the ones in Toronto, especially when you listen to them, they met for longer than us. They met for 7 years before they got anything. And the first thing they got was a garden. 3 years after that, they now have hundreds of units. They have, I don't know how many Parkdale have. And same with another Circle land trust, same thing. And that's kind of a common refrain here in Canada with the land trusts is, and now that I'm on the network, I'm meeting with new land trusts that feel equally hopeless, and there's just no direct program to go apply for. But, there were times when I wouldn't have believed that there was a few rich people out there that were going to give me $1 million or us $1 million to buy an SRO. It just didn't seem like that was how this was going to happen, but here we are. It did. And then once you get that momentum and you get a building, more stuff happens. And, we're kind of at that place where opportunities are opening up. And So you just, yeah, I think it's just sticking with it and continuing to meet and plan when it can feel a little hopeless at times.
Yeah, a combination. If Andy and I didn't have so much experience in the neighborhood, it would be really hard. So we've got kind of interesting leadership and on our staff team too. And we have a mix of people with a lot of social experience and lived experience too. So mixing in the two together, we do that in the downtown east side really well, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing their story with us. It's very inspiring. Let's give them a hand.
Thanks, you guys. It was fun to talk
Yeah, thank you
about
so
our
much.
experience. We don't get a chance to reflect a lot. Good luck in your journey.
I'll let you go.